Hi, it's 7 o'clock now, so we're going to get started. My name is Ari Santas. I am the president of the Philosophy and Religious Studies Club. And the club is run by Dr. Serrán-Pagán. Raise your hand. Say hi. Also, I want to acknowledge his help and his support this year. This is going to be our final event of the year. So let's give him a round of applause for all his help. Also, we couldn't get this event set up without the help of Dr. Santas's Philosophy 3180 class called Ethics and the Environment. The students who have helped, please raise your hands. Give them a round of applause. And I want to thank the panelists for taking time out of their busy schedules. I'm sure you guys are all busy right now at the end of the semester.
Not
busy?
No.
But I want to thank you all for showing up and helping us with this panel. And without further ado, I want to thank Dr. Santas for moderating this panel discussion. He's got a very good set of questions lined up for our panelists tonight, so let's give him a round of applause too. And I want to thank you all for attending as well.
Well, thanks, Lisa. And actually, the students with the club formulated the first draft of these questions, and we just kind of tinkered with them. So I'd like to acknowledge that. So what I'm going to do is I'll first introduce the panelists, and then we're going to show a short video, which I think kind of sets the tone for the discussion, or at least much of the discussion this evening. So after I've introduced the panelists and shown you the brief video, then we're going to have some questions for the panelists, beginning with a question which kind of prompts some initial opening remarks about how they approach the question of climate change. And then after we go through some questions and let people respond to them from the panel, then we're going to open up to discussion from the audience, and we'll ask you to pose your own questions to them, to any or all of the panelists. We were supposed to have microphones this evening, so luckily it's a small room. If you have any problems hearing any of us, please just indicate with some kind of gesture. It's actually important for the purposes of videotaping that the volume is good, so help us by prompting us to speak up if we need to. Okay, so what I'd like to do is introduce the panel now, and I'll just do that in alphabetical order. We'll start with Dr. Jason Allard, who's sitting on the end here. Dr. Allard is Associate Professor in the Department of Physics, Astronomy, and Geosciences here at Valdosta State. He has been teaching here since 2008. He holds MS and PhD degrees in geography, specifically climatology, from Pennsylvania State University in University Park, Pennsylvania. He also has a BA degree in geography from the University of New Hampshire in Durham. Dr. Allard has served as director of the Southeast Regional Climate Center, Columbia, South Carolina. That was back in 2006 and 2007. And prior to that, he served as program manager and research climatologist from 2005 to 6. He's also served as a lecturer and New Hampshire State climatologist at the University of New Hampshire, Durham. So he's our climate science, one of our climate science experts here tonight. Dr. Allard is the author of numerous peer-reviewed articles on climatology and climate change. It's actually a very impressive list. I won't go through it with you, but if you'd like to know more about it, I'm sure he can tell you. Next, I have Dr. Diane Holliman, who's sitting here right next to me. She is a professor in the Division of Social Work here at Valdosta State. She's been here since 1999. She holds a PhD in social work from the University of Alabama, Tuscaloosa, MPH from the University of Alabama, Birmingham, and an MSW from the University of Georgia. She also holds a BA in Sociology and Religion from Birmingham Southern College. Dr. Holliman is also the author of numerous peer-reviewed publications, and her field, of course, is social work and public health. In addition to her academic work, she also has served as a social worker. That was at the Tuscaloosa VA Medical Center in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, and as a medical social worker at the University of Chicago Hospitals in Chicago. Next, we have Dr. Michael Noll sitting on the other side of me, who is a professor of geography in the Department of Physics, Astronomy, and Geosciences at VSU, and he's been here since 2000. He holds MA and PhD in geography at the University of Kansas, and prior to that, he studied physical geography at the University of Trier in Germany. He served as the Valdosta State University Faculty Senate President and a member of the Steering Committee for the Faculty Staff Divestment Network. He's the author also of numerous peer-reviewed articles in physical and cultural geography, so he works on both sides of the field. And of course, in addition to his work at Valdosta State, he's a regular guest columnist for the Valdosta Daily Times, a member of the Valdosta Police Department Advocacy Board, and is the president of the Wiregrass Activists for Clean Energy since 2010. Last but not least, we have Reverend Floyd Rose on the other end here, who is the pastor and founder of Serenity Christian Church. He's been there since 2011. I think you said you founded that on your birthday when you turned 70. Is that right? He was previously at and founded the church at Pine Hill. And prior to his work in Valdosta, he was a founder of Family Baptist Church in Toledo, Ohio, and has been preaching since the age of 11. Early in his life, Reverend Rose was a mentee of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and has been involved in civil rights work for over 50 years. He's president of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference and has been involved in numerous local issues, most recently in the issue of the new high school, which is an $85 million plus project, and confronting the disparity in job offerings for minority contractors. Reverend Rose is also a guest columnist and a regular contributor to the Valdosta Daily Times, as well as a member of the editorial board. So please welcome our panelists. So at this point, we're going to show just a brief video that appeared recently, just to kind of set the tone for things, and then I'm going to ask the first question, as well as encourage the panelists to maybe make reference to it or comment on it if they like. Okay.
I'm not a real firm believer in climate change.
What's your view of climate change? Like, do you think it's a real thing or not?
I'd say it's something that I don't think I've really thought a lot about. And I don't think it's something that gets talked a lot about here on Woodward.
They don't talk about climate change, but every single day they talk about the weather.
High of 104 to 106 is the forecast high.
We have firestorms, we have ice storms, we have tornadoes, we have blizzards. We don't really reference the climate change word as much out here.
We'll have a heat index of 110 to 115, which is very, very dangerous.
But they address it and how the weather impacts them.
Oil and gas is king in this country, in this state, and no one wants anything that's going to hamper the oil and gas industry.
I used to be full-time in the oil field.
Well, I'm employed in the oil field.
I'm an oil and gas company.
If there's no oil field, there's no jobs.
Our whole economy runs on fossil fuels.
Is there a time that we'll go away from fossil fuel? Yes, it is not a renewable resource.
We as human beings have a tendency to put off what we really need to do if it has the capacity to make us uncomfortable.
Al Gore is a cuss word.
I go back to Al Gore's Inconvenient Truth.
We tend to be very conservative.
I've not seen the film, but I've seen bits and pieces.
We tend to not always trust everything that comes out of the media's mouth.
Whenever you hit a crossroads of fact-finding, then you tend to fall in line with the people who you believe in other political arenas.
I don't know who I would trust.
There's got to be people we believe, we trust, that get behind this cause and say, this is an issue. And then I think you will see people get on board in droves.
I just figured that, the good Lord's he's the only one that knows,
Now you might say the environment is perfect today because God ultimately controls the environment.
And maybe we shouldn't interfere with it.
God speaks directly to issues out of the scripture. And when he said in Genesis, be good stewards of this land and take care of it. That has value always. God does talk about us taking care of what he's given us.
Christians should be the original tree huggers. I mean, we think it's a moral issue to take care of the planet. We've gone solar, most people I know. most of my family.
We're gonna try to have a solar system big enough to supply all the needs of our house.
The old people know, like, what we did in the Dust Bowl. Like, my grandpa talks about how they knew that they caused it because they plowed the earth so much.
There would be periods when the sun would be blotted plumb out.
I think older people can look back and see how things were generations ago.
Yeah, we ought to be on the same path. We're just fighting over rhetoric.
I completely agree that it is an issue, and there's plenty of evidence that it is, that we have a responsibility to do something.
If we don't do something now, I think it's just going to get worse.
Being a part of this has made me more curious to study more and find out if there's something that I can do personally.
Everybody would go out and be good stewards and realize that God has given us this planet and we should take care of it. Then I think we'll be in good shape.
Okay. So with that in the back of our minds, I'm going to pose the question to each of the panelists and ask them to spend maybe 5 minutes responding to this. So here's the question. How do you view the impact of climate change in this region? And how does the topic of climate change impact your work in your profession and or your community? So we want to start on this end and just work our way down?
Sure. Well, this one's kind of obvious for me since I teach courses on weather and climate. So
that was your
it
easy
is my
question.
work, my profession, and people constantly ask me about it. So it's pretty much around me every single day. I can't get it. I'm trying to get away with it, but I can't get away from it. As far as the impacts, it's part of what I study. It's part of what I research. So when I first read this question, I wasn't sure if I had an answer because it is so part of my life that I really can't separate it. I've been studying this for 2 decades, and so I just see it, and I understand the reasons and what could happen. So I'm not sure if I can separate it up.
Well, we can leave it there and come back.
Sure. Let me actually do this a little differently. I think that the best way to perhaps start with it is to talk about not actually climate change as the buzzword, because the two typically kind of turns people a little bit off, or they kind of like, they hear Al Gore and they don't want to hear anything anymore. But basically, this is not just about climate change. This is basically about energy freedom and energy choices in the end, when you look at the possibilities of developing renewable sources of energy. This is also, in the military, recognizes this rather well about national security. As one of the comments in the DVD or in the video said, everything in our country runs on fossil fuels. It's actually not quite true, but fossil fuels are immensely important. And the fossil fuels are finite, as in we're running out of it at some point, we have an issue at hand. It's also about public health. It's not just that we have global climate change, increasing temperatures, it's also that the use of fossil fuels leads to, for example, air pollution, leads to increases in rates of cancer or asthma or what have you. There's a number of other issues really connected with that. It's also basically about innovation and competition in the end, because once you realize the reality that there is global climate change, that we need to go away from a fossil fuel-based industry or culture, if you want, then you have to become innovative, you have to bring new ideas, you have to be competitive, because the rest of the world is not asleep at the wheel. We are still somewhat asleep at the wheel, and you see how in Europe, how in East Asia, and places like Japan, enormous developments are happening, and we're missing out on them. So there's a lot of things involved here. So you could talk about physical aspects of the environment, what that does, we can do this later, or cultural, economic, or political, societal aspects. And that's really what I want to look at. It's not just climate change. We can leave that out for a minute. It's about all these other things too. It's about job security. It's about competition. It's about energy independence, and so on. So there's much more to this than just climate change.
Do you have the slides that I had sent? Oh, good, because I have some websites on there. Well, the first part of the question, how do you read the impacts of climate change in the region? Well, let's talk about South Georgia. Let's talk about South Georgia. Can you hear me? The frequent storms, the intense storms, all the emails we get about classes. Are you going to cancel class this weekend? Because storms are coming up. We're seeing more and more storms, and that's one thing I'm seeing. And as a professional social worker who teaches here at VSU, from many of my students, especially from the area around Waycross, they've talked about not so much climate change, but the rise in cancer rates in that area, especially in children. And there are a number of industries there, a number of pollutants in that area. So not only do I see climate change as an issue, but the pollution, the other effects of the environment. So, and with this region as a social worker, one could say that we live in a resource desert here. We're in the state of Georgia, but we're not Atlanta. And often the dialogue about who gets what when it comes to resources is surrounding the Atlanta area, Savannah, Macon, not Valdosta. And let me come back to that. But we were known as a resource desert, and I'm going to get to the next part of the question. How does this controversy or whatever, to me it's really not a controversy because we have so much evidence of these changes, but how does it impact my work in my profession and my community? As a social worker, our professional organization, the National Association of Social Workers, until about 2010, the NASW and the Council on Social Work Ed were slow getting on board when it came to environmental issues. And most of what we talked about, we even have a course called Human Behavior in the Social Environment. And we would talk about the dignity and worth of individuals, but that would be humans, people, rather than all of our environment. We talked about the environment, but not so much the natural environment. In 2010 or so, I was at an international conference in Australia, and especially the people from outside of the U.S. were saying, it's time that social workers get on board and talk about climate change and talk about the world that we know it. Without the world, us as humans are doomed. And we're not the only game in town when it comes to life forms. And that's a different way of thinking for many people. And when it comes to advocacy with policy issues, I've had colleagues that say, well, you know, there are enough issues surrounding people without getting into the environment. And then there are groups that advocate for the environment. In NASW, we were in our niche about our people stuff, but I think now, since 2010, we're seeing more and more of we're all in this together. And if we don't have the world, if we don't have water, if we don't have clean air, if we don't have a place to live, if we have bad storms all the time, we're doomed. And let's see. And just some things that I really want you guys to know. As we were planning this, we got a nice bibliography of stuff that Michael Noll sent me before the flood. You guys have probably seen it. It's a very good National Geographic video. It's about an hour and 35 minutes long, and it's free. You can watch it on your phone. I watched it on my phone, but I thought it did a very good job in explaining climate change. And then there was a website that you can Google on the bibliography, how to talk to climate skeptics. And they have like different categories of responses and how to respond with real high quality information. And then, there's new websites that I've been very interested in called News Deeply. They have Syria Deeply, Arctic Deeply, Refugees Deeply, and Water Deeply. They look at current news stories and news stories that involve the local people in those areas, because often with our news, it's not so much coming from the ground as what the newsmakers are putting out there. So I encourage you to go to those websites. And another one that I'm shamelessly promoting is the Social Services Database. In this community, we, as I said, we are a resource desert. And maybe in another place, agencies that help people are more connected and moving forward. But I believe that's something that we need around here. People aren't talking to each other in organizations, and I was, and of course, Reverend Rose, you can comment on this, as, in this community, they still refer to black churches and white churches, and there are white churches that don't talk to each other, and there are black churches that don't talk to each other, and the same for organizations that help people. I mean, they don't, so this is a database, please Google it, we're trying to get resources to, trying to get this together so we can write a needs assessment and ask folks what they need, rather than telling folks what they need. And I have one more thing, I know I'm talking. That when the tornado, it was a bad storm in Ada, everybody wanted to help, which was fabulous. That's the strength of this community. And individuals, faith-based group, all wonderful. People were bringing food, people were bringing old clothes, people were bringing stuffed animals, which, okay, there may be a need for stuffed animals when there's a tornado that hits, but instead of us saying, hey, you need this, you need that, I'll just bring all my old stuffed animals and that'll solve the problem there. We need more networking that involves people, more education, and also more education about climate change. I have a lot to say.
Thank you, Dr. Hall.
You're welcome.
Let me begin by saying that I am human, not by choice, but by chance. I am black, not by choice, but by chance. I am an American, not by choice, but by chance. I am male, not by choice, but by chance. I am a Christian, not by chance, but by choice. I chose to be a Christian. As a human being, I share a common bond with all other humans all over the world, and I am affected by everything that everybody else that a human is affected by. I am black, and therefore I share a common bond with all other blacks wherever they live on this planet. I am a Christian, not by choice or chance, but by choice. I chose to be a Christian. I'm an American, not by choice, but by chance. I didn't choose to be born here, and therefore I am an American, not by choice, but by chance. I'm a Christian by choice, not by chance, and therefore I share a common bond with all other Christians, whatever their denomination, whether it be Baptist or Methodist or Church of God, or Church of God in Christ, or Church of Christ, or Catholic or Presbyterian, whatever might be their denomination. If they are Christian, I share a common bond with them, period. Now, my reading of the scriptures says that God didn't come down here but one time. That's when he blew into man's nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul. And every other time, he always sent somebody. When he wanted to free the children of Israel from Egyptian bondage, he didn't come down here. He sent Moses. When he wanted to get black folks off the back of that bus, he didn't come down here. He sent Rosa Parks. When he wanted to free us from discrimination and segregation in public accommodation and in public education, he didn't come down here. He sent Martin Luther King. And so it goes. Before we are anything else, I want to emphasize this one more time. We are human. made basically out of the same stuff, whatever may be our race, our religion, our creed, our color, our national origin, or our country. And for some strange reason, we seem to forget that. And so we separate ourselves into different religious groups and social groups and educational groups and all other groups, and then we tend to react to the people based on our own definition of those people. Now, I want to say one other thing about climate change. I'm affected by it, and so is everybody else in this country. I don't care how much you want to deny it. This planet is getting warmer, and if we don't do something about it, we're going to all be in trouble. Every last one of us. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you for your responses to that first question. The second question that is going to be posed, and you want me to do the clicky thing?
Either or.
How's that? And I just want to preface the question. First of all, it's kind of twofold. One is about, what is the evidence for climate change? And if you're a climate scientist, it's so obvious you don't even want to talk about it, probably. But if you're talking to someone who, wasn't convinced, what would be, and they were willing to know and not just closing their minds to you, what would you cite as the primary evidence for that? And I would direct that part of the question primarily to our climate scientists or geographers. And then secondly, the second part of the question really speaks to the disconnect between scientific community and lay people, specifically in this country. And that part of the question, of course, as you can see, is do you think the scientific community is communicating clearly the effects of climate change? Okay, so first of all, I'll just ask our, at least our climatologist and maybe our geoscientists to answer that first part of the question. If someone else wants to chime in, that's fine. And then secondly, I'll ask everyone to respond to the second part of the question.
Sure. The evidence for climate change comes from many different sources. First, you have observational records. There's stations that have been recording temperature, precipitation in the United States for 125 years, some longer than that, and it shows the increase in temperature, steady increase, a faster rate of increase than we've seen in recent times. Satellites, since they came online in the late 70s, early 80s, have shown an increase in temperatures. Then you've got other things that are more proxy data sources, like the cryosphere. You have melting alpine glaciers that are retreating upslope. You have decreases in sea ice, the Arctic Ocean, the ice there. You mentioned national security. That's an issue now. It could be ice-free the entire year, and so you have all of northern Canada that can now be accessed relatively easy without having to go through sea ice. You have melting of the Greenland and West Antarctic ice sheets. You have sea level rise, partially from thermal expansion, just the heating, because oceans have been warming also, but also from ice melting on land. There's decreasing snow cover. You have ocean acidification from the carbon dioxide that's been, excess carbon dioxide has been emitted into the atmosphere. So there's just not a single source. You put this to as a collective, and the fact is the Earth has unequivocally been warming in the past century. So, want to add any other evidence for it?
And maybe not add the evidence, I'll provide some additional information. I also want to mention one important...
Can I insert the word anthropogenic?
Anthropogenic? Sure.
Yeah. Human caused.
Yes.
Okay.
All right.
$20 word.
You have to realize that, from my point of view, the only reason why we have still this discussion, sort of like us still discussing, is there gravity? Yes, there is. From my point of view, it's clearly established that we have climate change. I mean, you can look at the data, anthropogenically caused climate change as in correlated to increases in carbon, in greenhouse gases, as in CO2, which you can measure in ice cores and what have you, those kinds of things. They're clearly established. If you just travel around a little bit and go to the Alpine territories in Switzerland, I've been doing this on occasion since I was in my, since I was a boy of about 8 or 9 years old, I was back in the late 1960s until today, glaciers have been retreating. You can see this. You can see it also when you visit indirectly, again, a measure for climate change is when you go visit cities like Miami. The mayor of the city of Miami, one of the largest cities in Florida, has literally spent hundreds of millions of dollars to literally keep the sea at bay because the seawater levels are rising. And you have cities from New Orleans to Miami all the way up to Virginia that have to deal with this issue. If you don't like the direct evidence, as on the scientific evidence, you can look at the indirect evidence. You can even, if you're a horticulturalist, sit in your own garden. I mean, I have a Cleveland Select in a sense that behaves differently for the last couple of years in terms of when the leaves are turning. Literally, I'm like, this is crazy how late this is when it turns finally yellow, or as it's supposed to do in the fall, and it's doing this later now. I mean, we'll talk eventually about, you know, the expansion of certain diseases which come with maybe mosquitoes or other types of carriers, the expansion of the fire ants going further north. I mean, there are literally countless examples for why there is no doubt that there's global climate change. In this case, caused by humans, as we can directly correlate this with increases in carbon dioxide emissions and also methane and other things. We can talk about this for hours, but we don't want to bore you to death, so there you are.
Okay, and I was so excited about the question that I actually jumped to number 3 before I knew it. But we're still in the second part of question 2, which is what do you think about the efficacy of the scientific community communicating that evidence to the general public? Or what is the disconnect?
What was the question again?
Well, it was, do you think the scientific community is communicating clearly the effects of climate change? And that's probably better answered by non-scientists, right? That's a good idea.
No, that's fine. Well, I would say yes, the information is communicated clearly. However, the recent changes with what's happened with the EPA and the layoff there is incredibly disheartening. And as a social worker, one of my first thoughts was, gee, I thought they would come after the social agencies first. And I'm sure they're going to get to the social agencies, but...
They're already there.
What?
They're already there.
Right, yeah, they're already, yeah, with education, some, but we won't. But I guess, and as someone who's not a scientist in climate change, I would encourage the scientists to just keep up full speed ahead. And you guys are, I'm not just pointing out you guys, but I think there are a lot of good YouTubes, and you know how we are with social media, and just stuff to put out there showing the evidence time and time again about climate change, and not to be apologetic and not to back down in a nice way when someone, maybe when you make an observation like, oh, this plant is blooming early, I wonder if this is climate change. And then someone gets on you and says, it's not climate change, this is normal. And to really say, no, well, things like this, is this one case, and a case doesn't make a cause, you know, just because it's a cold day doesn't mean that climate change doesn't exist, but to respond to the person nicely and to just not let up. Not let up on social media, not let up in legislative advocacy, because this is about us, this is about our world and our future.
I would only say that we have to learn how to speak to people in the language that they understand. You can talk from now till Jesus comes back. I think he's coming back.
It's too hot.
But if we don't talk to people in the language that they understand, I don't care what we say about it, it's not going to work.
Yeah, please go.
I wanted to add, there's a lot of information out there. A lot of organizations put out information, but when I think to somebody in the clip, where do they go? if you do a search online, you're gonna get a lot of bad science too, as well as some good science. And if you don't know much about climate change, basics of climate change, you could pick the wrong site and it will just give you complete misinformation. So it has to be reliable, and not everybody can figure out what is the reliable data sources. Should they trust a government website? Would you trust the EPA's website now versus a year ago? So, and I think the person in the video mentioned that we talk to people they trust. So maybe they're politicians, they're senators, or representatives. And in that place in Oklahoma, I'm not sure exactly who's in office, but it probably is somebody that more likely not to skeptic of climate change. So you really need to be careful what you're looking at and think about the source that it's coming from, the agenda that might be behind why they're giving you the information they're giving you. And that can be daunting for somebody that's just initially starting out. It's just a Google search first site could be completely look nice, look reasonable, but just be completely bad science.
And if I may add something to that, you have to also realize, of course, that the industries, lobbying groups are very good. They're masterful in trying to really seed or create basically confusion to kind of distract us from the evidence, to undermine the information that's available. There's a whole industry out there that's being paid for basically making sure there are as many people as possible doubting that there is global climate change as part of their job. And I would like to actually add on something to what Dr. Holliman said a little bit earlier, to understand what the kind of situation we're dealing with right now when it comes to the EPA or the political situation we're dealing with. It has already been difficult enough to address issues of climate change even before we saw a change in government at the White House recently. When you look at the person who was heading the EPA, it's a guy named Scott Pruitt. He's an individual who became famous for suing the EPA. So he was somebody who was literally opposed to the EPA, who's now essentially at the head of it. And he does not believe in climate change. When you look at the people working for him, you have his chief of staff, a guy named Ryan Jackson. Ryan Jackson actually formerly worked for Senator James Inhofe, who is one of the most outspoken climate deniers in Congress. Then there's another individual, Byron Brown, who's another Inhofe staffer, who's also now working as Jackson's deputy. You have another individual named Mandy Gunasekera. She's a law school graduate who worked as a lobbyist for the chemical industry and also for Senator Inhofe, and who is the individual literally who gave Senator Inhofe that infamous snowball as he tried to, back in 2015, disprove global climate change because there was an unusual snow event in Washington, D.C. You can't make this up. And you have the people, it's like making me a vegetarian, the chef at McDonald's. That doesn't work. And then you have to also put this in the context of with the current budget cuts, for example, we're cutting out literally 4 satellites in the coming years. And these satellites are important to continue research on evidence for global climate change, whether or not this is about aerosols, whether or not this is about basically, the reflectivity or the solar energy that we receive, whatever it is. There are 4 satellites that are being cut out of our budget, which makes us literally blind. So not only do we have the blind leading us, it seems, where even those who can see cannot see any longer or not see what they need to see in order to address the issues we have. This is utterly crazy. And you really don't know where to start and where to stop with this. So EPA, we have lots, and you're absolutely right, we need to be able to talk the language of the people. Because if we're using terms like cryosphere, you did. I don't know if anybody knows what it is. And I use that language all the time too, and I'm like, wait a minute, maybe I have to tone this down and explain it so I can talk to everyone, so they understand me, because if we're not communicating this, we can say what we want. It goes like in here, out there, and nothing gets worked in or out in the middle of that, all right? Anyway, sorry.
All right, well, I think we've covered to an extent, by virtue of my being a little bit overzealous, the third question, but I was, maybe if we could just, if there's anything more that might need to be said about the level of certainty, about the evidence that climate change is caused by human activity? Because I know there's a lot of certainty, obviously, about that it is happening. That's probably impossible to doubt at this point. Do we have that same kind of level of certainty with respect to whether it is anthropogenic, to use a fancy word, or caused by human activity? And I'm wondering if
He's the guy.
Climate scientists can speak to that before we move on.
So I pulled some of the language from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. It's a group of hundreds of scientists that review thousands upon thousands of articles. Every few years synthesize a report, a multi-volume report. So it's basically the authority on what's happening in climate change. In their language, it's extremely likely that more than half the observed increase in global average surface temperature from 1951 to 2010 was caused by anthropogenic increases in greenhouse gas concentrations and other anthropogenic forcings together. Now, in this case, they define their terms. Extremely likely is 95 to 100% probability. So it's the fact that, well, it's also certain that we've put greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. We've increased the concentration by about 40%. And we can prove that by doing isotope analysis of these gases, and we know they come from the fossil fuels, not current sources. So we also have, with certainty, that we're putting greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. And they temper it by saying 95 to 100%. What's 100% certainty in life besides death? I wonder now about taxes, if that's 100% certainty. It's almost as certain as you can get. Yes, it's the number that's often cited is 97% of climate scientists believe that humans are changing the climate. They're affecting the climate. And to which I also start thinking, what else is there in this world where 97% of the experts will agree upon? And there must be something, but I'm not sure exactly what it is. So the science really is there, but you never stop. Good scientists never stop. You keep on doing research. You keep on examining. You may have overlooked something. It could make you more certain in what you're doing or less certain. But really the science is there now that, yes, humans are impacting the climate.
So in other words, if I can put this into different terms, so I mean, any wildcats in here?
Kansas?
As in football teams, if you have a football team that wins, say, 95-5, who won? I mean, it's that simple. I mean,
Who played a better game?
Who played a better game? That's the thing.
Sorry. It was rigged. The game was rigged.
It's fake. Say it's fake.
It's fake. All right, so let's move on. This one is just asking, how do people and corporations in this area contribute to climate change?
Start again.
Whoever wants to start.
Just about anything we do. We use fossil fuels to drive our cars.
Yeah.
Most of us do biomass or coal to heat our houses at the university. Something I can't remember the source right now, but vegetables travel on average 1,500 miles before they get to the store. And that's really intensive fossil fuels. Transporting, manufacturing, particularly beef, cattle, it's
Yes.
very resource intensive. So there's not much that we do that doesn't use fossil fuels and eventually make its way to affect the climate. So even sitting in my house, the air conditioner's on. It's electricity, which is generated from coal, probably, or biomass in this area.
All I was going to say is that, and all that sounds good, the problem comes back to one thing. How do we translate all that good sounding stuff to the people who don't understand what you're talking about? I traveled this country with an old man who used to say, if you lower the bucket down so everybody can sop, then you're all right. And he would turn to us and say, boys, when you're talking, just lower the bucket down. Let everybody sop. And so she mentioned about the difference in the churches. Now there's some black folks sitting in here, y'all know, but y'all don't have service like white folks. That's just come to our church and they preached and we said they'd look at them. So that's what they do. But now when we get up and talk, then, you know, you say, can I get an amen? And we get one. And I was in Nashville, Tennessee, and I leaned over and said to the preacher, I said, how long should I talk? He said, oh, you can talk as long as you like, but we go home at 12. Okay, what did you say? Yeah, we go home at 12. So there is a difference in that.
Gotta get out to eat.
It may not have anything to do with race as much as it does with culture. The culture is just different. And we recognize that, so we're talking about climate change. I want you to tell me something I can go back and tell my folk in the language they understand.
And if I can turn the question actually around or play around with that a little bit, is yes, we all are ultimately responsible for a problem, but if we're all participating in the creation of the problem, we can participate in the solution to it just the same way. In other words, I mean, I don't want to pick on any particular corporation because there are also corporations who have completely shifted gear and have invested in say, construction of new buildings that are low energy costs or low energy use. Despite the fact that we live in an area where we have an industrial authority or an executive board of an industrial authority that at some point was relatively skeptical when it comes to solar energy, we now actually have here, and you may not notice, a solar energy power plant that's more than 2.2 megawatts. It's fairly close to Mud Creek water treatment facility. Most people don't know that we have a solar power plant. But really, it doesn't matter if it's an individual like you and any of us here sitting in front of you, or if these are larger corporations, we can all, one way or the other, make quite a bit of a difference. And there are so many ways of how we can do this in terms of resource consumption, not wasting, basically, also, and also investing in insulation, in renewable sources of energy, and changing the way you eat. I mean, I became a vegetarian 2.5 years ago, basically because my daughter and I decided that's what we're going to do. But you know, when it comes to protein as a source, you can get it from different sources. Right? Like you can either have it from beans or you can have it from meat. But how much energy, how much water do you need to produce 1 pound of meat versus 1 pound of beans? Once you do all the math, it's an incredible difference. So I'm not asking you to become vegetarians, it's just I'm asking you to realize all the things that we do without reflecting on it, and then you can just tone things a little down. You want to have your steak every now and then? Go right ahead. You don't have to have it every day. And so there's so many things we can do to change, and it doesn't really take that much. And whatever you can do, that's what you do. Nobody becomes a saint overnight. Forget it. Sorry.
Yeah, and actually I was, right before you started, Michael, I was thinking about how you could flip that after Jason said that pretty much everything we do, which is probably true. And you know, it's really easy from that to just damn human nature, which is one of my favorite things to do, right? And, you know, people do what's around them, right? So the flipping that then the way you did was essentially ask the question, what kinds of things are people doing that we can emulate? That is, that we can copy, we can use as an example of the sorts of things we can all do on an individual level without even doing the policy, changing policy, you know, being an activist and all that. What are things you can do as an individual, something you could tell your congregation, for instance, or your students?
When I first purchased my house, I went out and I set out to make it more energy efficient. My neighbor called me a tree hugger, but I sealed the windows, digital thermostat, LED lights. It was an upfront cost, but I reduced my electricity consumption. My electric bill went down by 40%. So he's talking about how he spent over $200 that month. I'm like, oh, I didn't crack 100. And so you call me what you want, but for me, it's not just about the emissions. I saved money. And so a number of things you can do save you money and help the environment.
And with the eating less red meat, that can help the cholesterol count, blood pressure in the weight, and that's another benefit there. I just wanted to respond to one of the things that you said, and I don't know if I'm on target with this or not, but about communicating with people. One of the reasons I'm here in this panel is that my father was a biologist and a naturalist, and early on in my life, he would talk about things like overpopulation and how development was a problem, and my mother's response was, well, her response was she was not giving up her air conditioning. And some of the people that were supporters with my father were the rich folks, who were the folks who were talking with my dad about how we were destroying the planet. And my mother would say, well, with the poor folks, you're not going to tell them to give up their car, or you're not going to tell them to give up their air conditioning, because I'm certainly not giving up air conditioning. And I like that perspective that there are things that we can do without giving it all up. But a lot of these things with, and as an academic, as an environmentalist, these are seen as rich people issues, I would think.
And the thing is, you don't have to give up anything, you just have to be smart.
Yeah,
That's really all it is about in the end, and you will gain a lot from that too.
Okay.
that's that. I hope, with the way that sounds about these being rich people issues, or,
Well,
and they aren't. And with the destruction and the environmental change, it'll probably affect the poorest of folks first. Well, it'll affect all of us, but with refugees and...
Robert Boulder comes to mind, because, he's the father of the environmental justice movement, and one of the things he says is, you got to tell people that if you eat food, drink water, and breathe air, you're an environmentalist, right? And so, he tries to tell people, poor people and people of color who are most impacted by environmental problems, try to combine the efforts to create social justice with the environmental movement, which early in its history was more elitist, right? And so it's had to kind of change the language a little bit, but
like feminism.
But build alliances. Yeah, feminism, same problem. Had the same issues early on. But let's move on to our next question, and this one's specifically about what the Southeast would look like in 100 years, say, if the Earth's temperature continues to climb in the rate that we're projecting. For instance, the frequency and severity of natural disasters, like tornadoes and hurricanes. What can we look forward to if we just let things go the way they are?
Some of the estimates put temperatures increase in the southeast 4 to 8 degrees Fahrenheit. So when they're talking on there about heat index of 110, 115, that's dangerous. What about a heat index of 120, 125, where they suggest that you shouldn't be outside doing labor? So changing patterns of precipitation. Now, natural disasters like tornadoes, hurricanes, there's less certainty in what are those actually going to increase or decrease based on the records we have. So right now there's kind of maybe 100 years out becomes some certainty there, but right now, like tornadoes, yes, there's an increasing trend, but part of that's just because so many tornadoes were not observed. They were missed. Now we don't seem to miss them. You got a camera phone, you take a picture, we'll know about it. 1950, it happened somewhere, nobody knows about it. So that may be an artificial trend of increasing tornado frequency. Yeah, I was at a conference once, and I saw a map of the country, and it showed tornadoes, all the tornadoes when they first touched down. And it was where you'd expect it, and then I started seeing these lines, like I-10. Wow, tornadoes like to follow highways. No, it was just observed more. And if that's the case along those highways, it's occurring in other places. Hurricanes, go back before satellites, hurricane could be in the Atlantic, we wouldn't know it. So we have issues with the length of the record. It makes sense that hurricanes and tornadoes will become more frequent or intense. It makes complete sense. But the science is still sort of, it might be leaning, yes, more likely, but it's not necessarily definitive yet.
The thing I'd like to add to that actually is, and I just had the chance to go to Boston to a meeting of the Association of American Geographers and James Hansen, who I used to work for NASA, was there and gave a little talk, and if the temperatures are increasing, which seems to be likely, between 4 to 8 degrees Fahrenheit by the end of the century, you can have increases in seawater levels between 3 and 9 feet. And any kind of infrastructure, human infrastructure that's close to the coastline is already at more or less close to the seawater level, would be impacted. Whether or not these are roads or whether or not these are bridges, this could be a landfill. This will have an impact also on your sources of fresh water, your wells, maybe intruded by salt water. We're going to be dealing on a global scale likely if this keeps going. We can speculate it. I mean, really, as a scientist, you're uncomfortable answering a question like what will happen in 100 years, period. But when you look at the possibilities of what is connected with the kind of increase of temperatures that we are assuming between whatever up to 8 degrees or whatever it may be, and then the 3 to 9 feet higher seawater levels, you know that we're going to be dealing with millions of refugees, climate refugees, because the low-lying areas, whether or not they're in Bangladesh, whether or not they're in Louisiana, or whether or not they're in the Netherlands, and other places will be impacted. And the interesting thing is there was actually an NPR report just last week where all of a sudden the engineers in the Netherlands are really on demand, because they have done the dikes and the building of these constructions since the 13th century. And there's a reason why there's Manhattan Island, because Manhattan Island basically is reclaimed land from the ocean. About a third of the Netherlands is reclaimed from the ocean. And they're raising their protection there too. And so this will have enormous consequences, like it or not. John, you want to do a doom thing? Here it is.
Not 100 years, maybe 50.
Right, we'll do less than that.
Well, with that in mind, the next question really concerns poverty and the impact on people of such projections, whether it's the near future or 100 years out. And it's basically, what are the current safety nets in place for people who are going to be affected, or the safety nets in place for people who are already being affected by climate change in our area or other areas you're familiar with?
Short answer is no. There aren't any safety nets in place for people affected by climate change. However, when Hurricane Katrina hit, there were folks who relocated, and like we're hearing about refugees throughout the world, and with the changes in climate, we've got all sorts of things going on, but this will lead to more movement of people, and that's, no, we don't have the safety nets. Do y'all have anything? No, I'm looking for the answer.
Probably less in South Georgia, but there are things. Some of the low-lying Pacific Island nations, they're migrating people. They're buying land in other countries. They know eventually their nation's going to be underwater.
Wow.
So there are, Maldives, Marshall Islands. So these things, they are taking place. There's Miami, the pumps that are stopping the flooding of the city and high tides and stuff. They're building infrastructure. So that there are steps, seawalls created, but it's not enough. We're just, most likely the rate of climate change is just going to exceed right now what we're doing to mitigate the effects. So I'm just going to say it's more inadequate rather than non-existent. Maybe non-existent more around here, but you said what kind of desert are we in here?
A resource desert, a desert and services.
And you have to add in all honesty too that, as always, minorities and the poor will suffer the most. And if you have already a situation where you have a government currently that's cutting such things as the U.S. Agency on Homelessness, affordable housing, Meals on Wheels for crying out loud, I don't think we're going to expect much of a safety network. And it will depend on communities again, on churches again, to help. Because ultimately the government is more or less abandoning us. That's the way I look at it. Particularly when you have a blind EPA, both in terms of the satellites not there, as well as the leadership not knowing what the hell they're talking about. And then you have to cut to all these social programs. More doom and gloom for you, John.
Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Well, as the agencies come together, We have seen a positive response with that after the disaster. It might be a bit inadequate, but people seem to want to help. John may have something.
I was just gonna say, I work in public health, and we're real good at doing the immediate disaster stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
What we're not good at is the slow build of people in needs, and the safety
Yeah.
nets that we do have in place have holes and don't fit everybody, and we do a lot with a little bit with different things, but when you're looking at a crisis like a tornado, yeah, everybody can drop everything they're doing and deal for that for a couple, 3 weeks and take care of folks and what's going on. What happens if you start having this slow migration out of South Florida or other places where people are leaving coastal areas because they're underwater and they're moving into areas and it's a slow build, and we already don't have very good social safety nets and public health necessarily, and other things that people need, and then the people that live here don't want all those folks here and aren't going to increase their tax base to pay for those things. Is kind of a rolling effect that you get out of that.
These things require money before the fact. And no, I mean, right now as a country, we're not really doing very good at spending the money before. Even though many economists have shown that it's going to cost less to take steps now than in the future. The agricultural losses, all that is going to mount up from natural disasters to be more money than if we were to start spending now. But if we can't find money to repair our infrastructure, taking steps for climate change that could occur or become more severe decades from now, it's going to be tall order. So.
There was an old commercial I remember from my youth that was for automotive oil change. He was advertising oil changes for your car, and there was this guy in his shop, and he's looking at his oil filter, this terrible oil filter that he had pulled from his car that now needed completely retool the engine, completely rebuild the engine. And he said, "You can pay me now or pay me later." Right? And I think we're kind of looking at that as a possibility.
And we have the money, we're just spending it on the military too. The military spending has gone up. The other things, the social programs as well as EPA has gone down. Think about the insanity of that.
All right, well, we've already kind of started the segue into the audience participation part of this, thanks to Diane and John over there. But
Go, John.
There's a question here that the students had asked, and I think, some of you have already kind of hinted or even commented on this, but it's, what basically convinced you, obviously if you're a scientist, that's easy, but what has convinced you to the point where you are feeling impelled to act? Obviously being here is a form of action, right? But there are other things I'm sure you're doing. And then there's the last question, you might even answer it at the same time. What do you say to the climate skeptic, be it your student, church member, or general member of your community? Can you keep those two questions in mind at the same time? Who wants to answer that?
That's multitasking.
Climate change and ready to act.
And then the last one.
What do you say to the climate skeptic?
My problem has always been trying to find out what the person I'm talking to, what he or she might understand. And I learned a long time ago, if you don't speak in the language that people understand, you just waste your time and theirs. And this is a subject that has been difficult, at least in our community, because when you say climate change, most people don't know what you're talking about, period. And so no more point in discussing anything scientific about that. Politically, it's one thing. Socially, maybe another thing. And religiously, it's another thing. So what I want to find out is what I can say to them in the language they understand to get them to change their habits. Now, I can tell you about my wife. I don't know if one of y'all come calling my house about this. She gets up in the morning and she She measures everything, makes sure she doesn't get too much of that, and too much of that, and too much of that. And then when she get ready to go to bed, she eat a half a gallon of ice cream. You don't need to call and say nothing about it.
Because she might then tell us about it. So, I think these questions, especially the last one, might really speak to what maybe heart of the matter is. It's a crisis of perception and a crisis of communication. So, if you're someone like Reverend Rose, who has a congregation who may not really know the science, and yet he's a man who is rather quite intelligent, I would call an organic intellectual. He does a lot of research without having gone through all the degrees. You educate yourself to the point where you can now translate that scientific language into common language. So there's that role you play there. And then the people who are immersed in the language of science, perhaps the lesson there is to learn how to communicate that better to people who aren't in that world, who aren't swimming in it and just don't even initially respond because it's like it's so obvious to you. So that, I wonder if anyone has any comment on that.
That's why I actually tried to do this when we started with the panel, to not talk about climate change, but talking about this being a public health issue. Everyone understands health. Also about energy independence or the need or job-related questions. I mean, when we're dealing with the biomass plan and everything else, I see a special member here in the audience. I mean, this was also a question of economic feasibility in terms of the long run versus the short run. Short-term profits, all fine and well, but if you're in the long run, as Dr. Allard indicated, pay so much more to clean up your act or the consequences of you denying or doing anything about climate change. Climate change itself seems to be too abstract. I don't know why that is. To us it seems normal, but when it comes to jobs and health and everything else, that's when people can relate. And I think we have to explain it in different terms.
Well, that's one of the reasons I like to point out the amount of money that I saved with my house.
Right.
I took steps financially. I've long since paid off the upgrades that I did, and I'm making less money. So I presented as an economic, and the environmental is just on top of that. They don't think about it. I'm saving money. They're not. And jobs in the clean energy sector, they're there. And they're probably going to be more healthy for people than mining coal.
Would you say then that our governmental agencies should consider subsidies for those kinds of changes? And I know there are some subsidies already, but kind of ramping up the amount of subsidies available for lower income people to do that. And that not so much a handout as an investment in a future where you have to spend a lot less on disaster relief and public health issues that are going to arise from, right? Because we're kind of in the mindset now that we don't want to waste public money, right? We don't want to tax people and waste money doing things that are unnecessary. But if you see that as an investment,
I like it.
I mean, it's easier for you and me to do that, right, than for someone who lives.
Yeah, I have some financial flexibility.
Yeah.
So it cost me money when I first
yeah.
upgraded everything, but I had that.
Well, we don't make a ton of money, but we make more than a lot of people.
Well, I can afford a thermostat. So, yeah, but there's an initial investment in things, and there's some people living paycheck to paycheck. They can't. A friend of mine, when gas prices were up around $4, he does lawn care. So he's got his truck, it's like 8 miles per gallon in the trailer, all his equipment, and the fact that it was $4 an hour, just his profit margin went way down. Either he had to charge people more for the lawns and probably lost customers, or makes less profit. So it's difficult. It is easy for me to say that I made some changes because of my financial situation, but it's very hard for many people.
And to provide subsidies for business owners and landlords and people who can make an impact. Well, we all can make an impact, but what else? Just, you can, about communicating about this issue, you all can probably tell that I'm still pretty emotional and passionate when it comes to climate change. And it can be one of these things that for me, it's so clear and it's so dire that, and I think maybe others have been in this situation where you make a statement in support of climate change, and no one wants to be told that they're going to hell, or that they don't interpret the Bible, you know, blah, 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 like another person interprets the Bible, and with this defensiveness about climate change and this denial, I think Dr. Noll hit it on the head with the gas and oil companies, that there are, and Dr. Allard, there are strong corporations out there where it's in their short-term interest to not put this on the table about these changes, because in the short term, it would hurt their business. But I think with the evidence base, you know, things like the little YouTubes and other things, those are good to pass around to spread the message about climate change. Because it's tough. For some reason, you get a lot of pushback. When you talk about it economically, maybe not as much pushback.
Show the benefits.
But those benefits, but there is pushback.
Well, it also depends who I'm talking to, but one of the approaches that people ask me is okay, then what do you think's happening? So we say, oh, natural variability. What's causing that? What cycle? Sort of get them to think about it themselves. They say it's a natural cycle that's causing this warming. Do you know what the reason? No, I don't, but it's a natural cycle. If you don't know the reason, it could just be as easy a cooling cycle, and humans are warming it even more. So I try to get at them with what do you have to actually support yourself. And so I'm not really sort of preaching to them about it right from the beginning, but just letting them, and then I can sort of debunk what they're saying. It's awesome. It's easier to do that too.
Okay, I think we're at the point now